There we go. Welcome, everybody. We're now recording. You should get a little note up there that says that there's a recording in progress.
Beth, you have to push record.
I did just
Okay,
now.
so we're good. Okay.
Do you love this? We are real people. We are not fake people. We've been doing this for, goodness, almost a year now. Can you believe that, Rainey? Oh my gosh. Ugh. All right, so let's get to it. Go ahead and rename yourself. I'm going to do it when I turn the slides off because I sillily put that behind my presentation. I can't get to it right now, but I will do mine shortly and I will follow suit. So go ahead and rename yourself. Go ahead and put yourself on mute. It looks like, oh, everybody is following directions so well. And put your camera on because, like I said, we love to see your faces. It's so good. Go ahead and throw your name in the chat if you want to go ahead and do that. A lot of times what happens on this call is that people hear other people talk about really amazing things in our Q&A, and then they reach out to us afterwards and they say, hey, can you give me the email address of so-and-so? Because I want to hear more about that really cool exhibit that they were talking about. We're not gatekeepers here. Go ahead, throw your email in the chat if you're open to chatting with other people, offline, things like that. We're always welcome and ready to hook people together because we are collaborative. But otherwise, just throw it up there. Yes, we are recording. Finally, we figured that out. Um, all right, so let's get started. Museum Minds. If you have been to Museum Minds before, raise your hand. Whether it's for real, like here, manual, old school, or it's in reactions, either way. I see some repeats. I love it. John, hey. Courtney. Courtney is a past presenter here at Museum Minds. So like a notable person here in the house. It's so fantastic. And I know that there's another screen of people that I'm not seeing, so I'm sure that there's more. Awesome. So Museum Minds was started earlier this year when Rainey and I kept getting questions from museum folk. And we were answering those questions and just having really great conversations with people. And hold on a minute. I just got a text message saying, I'm in the waiting room. Goodness, if that's the case, I hope not. So, Rainey, do you want to explain why we started this whole business?
Absolutely. So, so Beth and I connected in a business incubator last year, and we both have museum backgrounds. And like she said, people kept asking us questions. What do you think of this? And then she'd send someone my way for marketing, or I would send someone her way for coaching. And then we just one day said, I think there's probably a way that we could have these conversations as a group and start inviting people to learn different topics. So we've had different topics, about partnerships, fundraising, marketing. We're going to do one on AI next year. And we're excited to have Rebecca here today to talk about museum culture. So we have this every month on the second Wednesday of every month. And it's just, again, a very kind of casual meetup. We do half, and this is what you're getting at right now, is it's half of learning and half networking and Q&A. So.
And we love it. Oh my gosh, we have connected with so many fun friends, so many interesting people. And we get to meet all of you on the call, but also who are we? We're crazy ladies. We love to do cool things. One of which is this, but also on the off times when we're not hosting Museum Minds and talking to really fabulous people who present with us, I am Beth Huswert, and I own Inspired Impact. I do consulting and I do coaching, all with the focus on museums. My background is in children's museums, so I have the most knowledge there, but I do a lot of coaching and workshop facilitation, both on and offline. So that's me. I've worked 25 years in children's museums, so it's been super duper fun. Rainey, who are you?
I am Rainey Robison. My business is Neptune Sugar. It's a marketing consulting agency that primarily focuses on arts and culture organizations, but I work with museums and nonprofits of all types as well. So I'm excited to have everyone here today.
It's so, so fun. All right. So you guys are here to hear other people talk. So we're going to get started and we're going to introduce our friend, Rebecca Schulman. Rebecca is here today to talk to us about some really, really cool stuff in regards to workplace culture. And I know that a lot of folks get confused as to like, what is workplace culture? So Rebecca and I talked about it a little bit, and she's going to kind of give us a little rundown. Introduce yourself and then pop into that whole question of what is it?
Yeah. Hi. It's nice to see you all. There are some of you that I'm seeing that I haven't seen for a long time. Lovely to see you all. And actually, well, so I will tell you, I will define the topic, but then we have a couple of polls that I'm going to ask Beth.
Oh, yes, that's right. We've got to do that first.
Okay, let's do the polls first. We want to know a little bit about you. I want to know. So first, we're going to ask you what your role is in your museum. And if you are a consultant or don't work in a museum, there is another option.
All right, I'm going to launch the poll. It's going to head up on your screen. You're going to see a little pop-up and it's going to ask you what your role is. Go ahead and just click whatever you are. And let's see what our group is composed of. This is funny. I get to see the results in real time, jumping all over the place. So good. Most people are responded. We're going to give just a couple more seconds because there's 4 people that haven't responded, but you know what? I bet you those are note takers. And they're probably AI, which we're going to talk about in January. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results with all of you. So it looks like, Rebecca, look at that. We have mostly people who are in upper management, leadership. You see that?
I should just say, I asked this because I know a lot of the questions that people ask are about how do you impact organizational culture from a non-leadership position. So super helpful to have that information and know who's in a leadership position, who's not. But don't let any of that stop you from asking questions if I'm not thinking about your perspective. And then we have one more question, which is about the state of your museum's culture.
That's right. It's going to come up here. What do you think? Is my museum a wonderful place to work? Is it good, but there's a few challenges? Or are we struggling?
And this is anonymous. So
yes, completely anonymous. Your boss is not watching. We just want to get insights. And I have to tell you that this is Rebecca's forte. Her business is called Museum Questions. The woman is just always asking questions because she's curious about a million things. Also, part of the reason why we titled this whole session, The Culture of Curiosity, because when Rebecca talks about her company, she says, I ask questions because I'm curious. Look at here. And here are the results. I like this. We're in the middle of the road.
Awesome.
Acknowledge that we're doing some good things, but we could do better, right?
Yeah. And I think this really reflects the museum field as a whole. There are a few places where people are like, we got it. But most people feel like there's work to be done, either a little work or a lot of work. So if that's how you're feeling, you're not alone. So I do want to, I'll define what organizational culture is. And when you see me looking to the side, I'm looking at some notes on my screen next to me. And then I want to talk about what a good museum workplace looks like. And then I have a number of other things that I want to talk about. So just to define workplace culture, organizational culture, it's the set of unwritten and often unacknowledged rules, values, assumptions, and norms in a workplace. So these directly impact how people do their work how they interact with each other, and how they feel about their place of employment. And just as an example about that, I've been doing a lot of work around meetings and the messages we send around meetings. I just had a blog post and an e-blast post about the hidden curriculum of meetings. And so the unwritten and unacknowledged rules might be around who gets to talk in meetings, who plans meetings, what happens in meetings. And those might be very different from what you think you are doing, because there's culture and then there's sort of stated values, and those are not always the same. And that's one of the challenges that we have. So that's what organizational culture is. What I'm going to share what I think a healthy workplace looks like, and then I would love if in the chat other people would add, just so that we have this vision as we go through the research that I've done and some of the work. So I see. I just want you to say that Zoom says it thinks I'm speaking French. Do I sound like I'm speaking French?
No, I hear you as a great English speaker. And
It just gave me a
translators
pop-up.
have not, yeah, we don't have a
It's weird.
translator.
So that was odd. To me, a healthy workplace includes the following: people are engaged, feel safe and supported, and understand how their daily work contributes to the museum. If there are barriers to doing their work, they have a way to make things better. So I'm going to paste that in the chat and then ask you to add to that. What else do we want to think about when we think about a healthy workplace culture?
Make sure that when you're, make sure when you're putting it in, it's not going to my note taker, because sometimes it defaults.
I think it's going to everyone. Okay, so Lori's adding, staff feel comfortable suggesting new ways of working, strategies for improving things. Everyone has a seat at the table. I did type in the chat. Somebody asked about that. Hopefully you can see from me. I just typed added the phrase I just read. People have a sense of belonging. Work-life balance is respected. Yes, that's a big one. Respectful of ideas, room for creativity and risk-taking. And one of the things that I've been noting is that's not a value of all workplaces. And for people for whom that is a value, you really do need a workplace where the culture includes risk-taking. Most museums, I think, at least want to be those kinds of places, but not every place does. Good feedback loop. See a path forward in the organization. People feel appropriately compensated. Everyone is heard. Everyone at all levels is heard. Feel like we're working toward a common goal. There's so much here. People feel like they're being invested in. Their culture is represented in the board and/or leadership. There's room for growth, ownership of the mission. And I'm sorry, I'm not reading every letter of this. I will be saving this because this is always so helpful to hear. Every time I talk to people, I expand my ideas about this. No fear about speaking up. People want to be there. Proper board governance is a critical factor. Thank you for adding that, Maggie. Accountability at all levels. Tanya said people who look like you, by which I'm going to take that to mean, I think, diversity, right? So that you don't feel like you're the only representative of a group and not valued for that reason. People feel like they can go to management if they need to, and a growth mindset. Okay, so these are some great things, and feel free to keep putting things in the chat if you'd like, or if you think of them. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to go back and give a little bit of my background. And then I'm going to talk about the challenges that museums are facing right now. Why is this an issue in museums? I'm going to take a little side turn and talk about burnout, because burnout keeps coming up, and I just want to define burnout and acknowledge burnout. And then I'm going to talk about my approach to organizational change and developing management skills in our field. So I have a consulting practice called Museum Questions Consulting. The primary work that I do is strategic planning, or that's what I had been doing. But organizational culture keeps coming up. It comes up for me as somebody who worked in-house in museums for 25 years. And it comes up during strategic planning. A lot of museums are tackling issues of organizational culture right now and want to think about how they can be better places to work, and kudos to them. And so I sort of started down this rabbit hole of how do we help museums become better places to work. There's also a management guru, management expert named Peter Drucker, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And as a strategic planner, I believe that is very much true. You can do all the planning, all the looking ahead 3 to 5 years and where do you want to be and come up with the best plan possible. But if people are burnt out and angry and there's infighting, you're not going to be able to reach it. So I started looking at organizational culture and did some research, primarily interviewing 14 museum directors and doing a lot of reading about what it is, a lot of which comes from the corporate field. So we in the museum profession really need to start translating in a way for us. So first, why is this an issue? It's an issue everywhere right now, I think, right? We have cultural changes happening in our world in the 21st century. We have, sort of differences in generational assumptions and what a workplace should be. As we have a post-COVID environment of where people work, there's sort of new challenges around that. As the income divide gets greater, that leads to additional challenges that we need to be loud and forceful about how big is that gap and how much people make. But there's some reasons that I think these are specifically an issue in museums right now. One is that management is important. Having a good manager is important, and we do not do any training for managers, zero. And that isn't true in the corporate world, and it's not true in every nonprofit. But I have yet to encounter museums, I want to say any museum, that routinely, when someone is promoted to the role of a manager, rolls out or sends them to a set of training. And the second is that I think museums are fuzzy about mission and vision. And we might be loud and proud about what our mission is in print, but we're still not sure if we're about people or about objects. The museum director is often really very focused on fundraising by necessity. And so the guiding ideas of what's running a museum, why we're pushing forward the way that we are, might not encompass everybody's role. So having worked in museum education workplaces for years and years and years and years, well, for example, I worked at the Guggenheim Museum for a long time, and I promise you that the work that I did, no matter how successful, was never going to move forward Guggenheim Bilbao, right? Not in any meaningful way. And so that mission was not encompassing of my work. And so many of us feel like we're doing work that's not being recognized, and that is why I think. And I know that there's a note-taking happening in the chat, and I'm going to close the chat because I'm finding it distracting. So Beth or Rainey, if something's happening in the chat that I should know about, please tell me.
I've got you. I've been reading and reacting, so I will grab any comments and questions for later.
Thank you. Thank you. So the report that I did will be sent to you tomorrow, I believe, by Beth. And it is available on my website. But there were 3 things that I asked directors about and that I looked at. The first is, how do we assess culture? The second is, what are the challenges that we're finding in museum culture? And the third is, what are the solutions? And for how do we assess culture, I found every museum has its own answer. We don't have an industry standard. And I feel very strongly that if you are embarking upon a plan to improve organizational culture, you need a strategic way to do interviews individually of staff. It cannot be the museum director doing all the interviews usually, because not everybody is going to share everything with the museum director. So either an outside consultant, an outside trusted volunteer, or a team of people from inside the organization. And I think that is really essential, because I think that walking around and sort of perceived culture is important and is valuable, but it's not comprehensive, and it's not really going to capture all of the problems. The second thing I asked about is, what are the challenges? And there's no real surprises here, but it's worth calling them out because, again, I think many museums have these problems. A big one is communication, and a lot of questions about transparency and how do we get more transparency, and is there an amount of transparency that's too much transparency? Another issue was management skills and systems. How do we make sure that our managers are serving employees well, that they have the information and support that they need, so that the people who report to the managers can have this support that they need. Workload is a huge one, huge. Silos, which is part of communication, people who are siloed into different departments, and maybe the education department and the conservation department never talk, and don't even know each other. And pay, of course, is a huge issue. And then for what are the solutions, you'll see in the report, I asked the 14 museum directors how they're solving some of these problems. And some of them had just fantastic approaches to how to create a positive workplace culture. And we are each doing this in isolation, and we do not yet have a database, right? A shared best practices. And that is something that I'm hoping to figure out ways to move towards. So if you know that you need to work on communication, how do you find 5 or 10 things that people have implemented in their museum so you can think about whether those are right for you instead of having to reinvent the wheel? Should I, Beth, do you want me to keep going or pause for any questions?
We have a few questions in the chat, but I also know that we're going to have like another half an hour for questions.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I would say right now it's probably, I'm thinking everybody is like, yes, 100%. I hear what you're saying. I agree. This is amazing. How about if you give us like a couple like low-hanging fruit type of actionable things that we could actually do?
Yeah.
There were low-level management, upper-level management, things like that,
Yeah.
but something that maybe we can do reflectively or
Yeah.
with our teams soon.
So I'm about to do that. Before I do that, I just wanted to talk about burnout because a lot of people are
Yes.
talking about burnout.
Yes.
And I think we are conflating a couple of things. We're talking about burnout. We're talking about overwork and weariness. Burnout is a very specific term, and I find it useful because I think a lot of people are burnt out. Burnout includes unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control. These are some of the factors in it. Insufficient rewards for effort, lack of a supportive community, lack of fairness, and mismatched values and skills. And the opposite of burnout isn't an appropriately sized workload. The opposite of burnout is engagement. And so I do think it's important to separate too much work from burnt out. When you are burnt out, you are disengaged. And we have a lot of people who are getting disengaged or on their way to getting disengaged. And the reason it's important to diagnose these separately is because therefore the treatment is different, right? We should all be working less. I 100% agree with that. But there's other things that are happening, like insufficient rewards for effort that contributes to burnout, and they're important to recognize. Okay, so some takeaways. There are 2 approaches that I have that I wanted to share, and I have a slide that Beth is going to share.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk about the reflective practice cycle. As an educator, I use this cycle in programming, and I found it extraordinarily effective in bringing programs that might be struggling to exemplar programs. And often I fault our field. For example, the AAM conference this year talked about wellness for talking about external things instead of internal things, right? We need to be talking about internal wellness. And so I think we can use some of the same tools and approaches. Our staff is every bit as important as our audiences. And so the reflective practice cycle can be used not only for programming, but for sort of internal programming that addresses the issue of organizational culture. And there are 4 parts of it. First part, upper right here, is set your goals. So what do you want to achieve? And the way you make decisions around that are those interviews that I mentioned, assessment, and also your own clarity as a leader, and ideally institutionally, as about your values and what you want your culture to look like. Not every individual in every culture are going to be a perfect fit. So you'd have a clear idea of what success looks like. And then the second piece is to align your programs. So what do you need to do to achieve these goals? Identify strategies and experiments that might work. So for example, if one of the issues is that people feel like I've heard from some people that they feel like the board has all this power. They don't know the board. They don't trust the board, right? And that often then will impact this sense of powerlessness. And so how could you help people get to know the board? How could you bring the staff and the board together? How could you clarify the board's decision-making process, et cetera? So it's aligning the programs that you're doing and the things you might experiment with those goals. And then you implement and evaluate. You put those strategies to work. Maybe there's 3 or 4 that you're trying, and then see what worked. And there is a sense of sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. I do see that Ali said no more pizza parties. I applaud that, although there might be workplaces in which time to gather around food is important, but often that's not the answer. But so you put these things into action, you evaluate to see if you are in fact having an impact on how people feel about working where they work. And then you also pause and see where you still need to do work, right? The goal of evaluation is to get better, not just to say, yay, we did it. And then you reflect and improve. So this is where you look at your evaluation, you think about what's working, you think about what's not, and you think about how you could do an even better job. So that's the reflective practice cycle, and that is how it applies to organizational culture. And thank you for sharing that slide, Beth. I'm done with that. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention to people is that I feel strongly that managers need training. It's not fair to ask people to manage staff when they have no training. And I've been working really hard with Rachel Ropeek and David Bowles. We call ourselves the SEED Trio. We did a program called SEED Baltimore that just wrapped up, which was for managers of gallery education programs. And we are now doing one on January 13th in New York City for managers of from any department. That's called SEED Management, and registration is open until December 20th. So I encourage you, if you're in the New York area or can get to the New York area, to consider registering for that, and we'll keep doing that. So our goal is to make sure that we have a robust and useful model, but go to training, learn how to manage, invest in your managers and help them learn how to manage. And then the last one is good leaders. 2 of the things that good leaders really need are self-awareness and listening techniques. My colleague Jen DePrizio talks a lot about self-awareness. She did a great session at AAM last year. But there are a lot of tools out there for self-awareness. And I think everybody in a museum, everybody anywhere could stand to be more self-aware. What are your values? Where do your values and your organizational values conflict, right? When you're struggling with a colleague, if your colleague is not acting in meetings the way that you wish they act in meetings, maybe they hate meetings, right? Maybe there's a better way for them to communicate. Get to know them and how they function best. It doesn't mean that they don't have to attend meetings, right? But maybe there are ways to address the fact that everybody is different. So to become aware of yourself, and then to become aware of your colleagues' needs and preferences. And then listening techniques. And there's 2 posts on my blog recently about meaningful listening. So a lot of people will say, oh, I have an open door policy. Oh, I'm always listening. But listening isn't just being in the room when someone is talking or giving people a space to talk. It is an active process of hearing what they have to say, doing this like combination processing in your mind where you think, okay, if I did do that, if we did try that, what could happen? Making those connections, right? It's that creative work. And then you might say, you know what, that's not going to work. And here's why I think that's not going to work. Or we can't do that now, but I'm going to hold on to that for a year from now. Or, you know, somebody a couple of years ago had that idea and we didn't try it and I'm still not ready to, but why don't you 2 sit down and keep thinking about this and come back to me in a couple of months, right? There's a way to treat people that demonstrates that you heard and that you are trying to understand what they care about and include them in the process of getting better. And that is meaningful listening. So those are the 3 things that I would say that people could do right now, is apply that reflective cycle to organizational culture. And that is what I do through my Culture Shift program. Improve their management skills or the management skills of their team, and work on self-awareness and listening techniques.
Awesome. Wow, Rebecca, you gave it to us.
That was a lot.
This is fantastic. My goodness. Well, understand everybody, like that was a lot, right? That was a lot. Rebecca did amazing, amazing. And the cool part about what we always do here at Museum Minds too is we're going to send you a quick summary of the call today. You're going to get a recording of the call today. Also, because you actually logged in today and you are here, all of the folks that are here today are also going to get Rebecca's key leadership skills. document that she really kind of dives a little bit deeper into those key leadership skills. So that'll be a nice reference document for you all to get. And that will come into your email tomorrow when we have the recording all set and ready to go. So we're excited about that. And I was just going to say something else. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. That happens. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take just like 1 or 2 minutes so that we can get a drink. And Rebecca can have a little hot tea because she did a lot of chatting. If you have to go, that's fine, I guess. But the most fun part is coming up, which is the Q&A. We always do a Q&A and a networking session for the last half of the call because we know that even though everybody put those great questions in the registration, we really want to give priority to the people who are here today. If you have a question during intermission, go ahead and raise your little mechanical hand down there, and we can queue up people to answer some questions while we're in the Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand ahead of time, or when we go to it, you just pop off of mute and say something. All right, so we're going to take an intermission that's going to be about 1 to 2 minutes. Grab yourself a hot beverage for your throat, whatever. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. All right, friends, we're going to come back on. I don't know. I always feel like for me, I need that little intermission because I'm a little introverted, if you can imagine. And it seems like we have so much fun. We see so many people's faces, then we need just like a tiny minute to ground ourselves and be like, oh, wow, that was so awesome. Can I like soak it in for just a tiny second? So I always like that little part. I'm gonna do a little screen share because I just want to reiterate that we have these 2 giveaways or takeaways from day today. We have just a summary page from Rebecca's findings from her research. And then just because you were here today, you get the key leadership skills document as well, which is so awesome. And then before we head into Q&A, I just want to remind everybody, we do this every single month and we love it so, so much. So next month, we're talking all about AI and working smarter, not harder. AI can be really intimidating, but at Museum Minds, we use it every day. So we have a few different techniques on how we're using AI, but we also have a couple other friends too that are kind of contributing to this topic, and they're going to give us some of their best practices. And we want to make sure that if you're intimidated or just kind of want to find some new ways to use AI, that's for January. Of course, in the email tomorrow, you're going to get a link to register for that. We'll put it in the chat too for that. Again, just because Rainey and I are the proud sponsors of Museum Minds, here are two things to just schedule a little call with us if you want to chat a little bit more or hear more about what we do. That's there for you. We can always put that in as well. Ooh, thanks, Rainey. She went ahead and put that registration link in the chat for you so that you can grab it and sign up for January. And then I have some Wonder workshops going on. Remember when Rebecca just talked about people not being trained? I feel like that was the best little cue up right here to what's going on here at Inspired Impact. I do a museum engagement training, and then I have had some really, really great participants, some of which are on this call right now, who have gone. If you go to my website, you're going to find a little bit more information about the workshops, or just contact me is fine too. Next one is actually next week. And then there's not another one for another 2 months. So let me know if you're interested. It is so, so much fun. And some of the feedback that I've gotten so far is, I have a degree in education, but I never thought of it that way. With that museum lens over the top of it. Wow, why didn't I interact with our guests that way before? Oh, I just loved that we could brainstorm new ideas together. Lots of time there's lots of different museums in the workshop together as well. So there's that. We did intermission already. If you want a little freebie down there that is kind of a supplement to those workshops too, I have these museum prompt cards. So usually we do that ahead of time, but I just did it right now because I want to make sure that you got that information. And it's question time. One of the questions that came up in the chat as we were going through was about small museums that don't have HR. What are some of your thoughts, Rebecca, on that? If there's anybody else in the audience who is struggling with the same thing or has found some really great solutions, we are Museum Minds Collaborative. So please plus up these answers. We know that we have a source of amazing people within this call as well. So quick little answers because we want to get in as many questions as possible. What do you think, Rebecca? Small museum, no
Yeah. So I think the important thing is that HR in museums tends to be functional and not strategic. So HR in museums is doing things like payroll, benefits. Those can be outsourced if your museum is not big enough to have HR, but big enough that you need help with that. HR in museums is rarely focused in a major way on organizational culture. So there is no reason that somebody else in your museum can't be focused on that.
Yeah, I always feel like museum culture is a collective effort that everybody, the standard gets set on what we're going to do, and then we have to start working the work. I think everybody who's here today has a mindfulness that they want to think about museum culture. And I feel like that is the first step. You have to be able to be open and understanding that museum culture is a thing that has to be worked on, and then it can be put into play.
I just want to note two things. First of all, Allie just noted, and I don't know if this was the way I said it or I'm misinterpreting what Allie wrote, but Allie, you said that HR should be functional and not strategic. I don't think that's a should, actually. I think it's a loss that large museums don't have strategic HR. Fortune 500 companies, and Allie's nodding, I think that's what she was thinking too, but have whole departments thinking about organizational culture. We just don't have the bandwidth. There's no museum that's really big enough to do that. And then also, yes, everybody's an important part of it, but it is very hard to change culture without your leader on board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hear you. And I have to say that, I talk with a lot of different museums across the country, just like Rebecca does, and just like Rainey does too, in that just recently I've started to see titles that say museum culture. So
Mhm.
there are positions that are starting to be put into different museums that are focused primarily on museum culture. So I really love that. I love that. One of the other questions that I think there was some good chat there was about non-monetary things for your staff to facilitate culture.
Um,
Any plus ups on that one? I think everybody's going to have suggestions.
So yes, money is important. There's no getting around the fact that money is important. And I have a lot to say about the money situation that I will not say now because that's not the question. I just don't want to downplay the importance of that. But I will say that even when I'm talking to people who are in unionized museums and they're union members and we're part of the process of unionizing or they are unionizing, it is as much about value as money. They want to feel valued. Money is critical to be able to pay your bills, but it's also a great way to show that people matter. But there are other ways to show people that they matter. And so I would say finding ways to demonstrate the value of people and things like keeping staff away from board is one way that one thing that makes people feel like they're not valued, right? Or they're never the face of the museum, or they're not publicly thanked for something, or their work doesn't feel like it's moving the museum forward in a way that's important to the museum director. Those are all issues related to value.
For sure, for sure. I agree. All right, so let's see. There were two more here. What can museum leadership do to make specialized technical positions economically sustainable without changing the job into something else?
I think I want to know a little more about that question. Well,
I was going to say, Michelle, can you come on and explain that one for us?
Yeah, sure.
Or Michael?
Essentially, yeah, oh, no worries. The question basically is just looking at some roles within museums that are very specialized to a given purpose or task. Like maybe you're a conservator or something. So you've got a applicable skill set that is to do that thing. But often it might be integral to the maintenance of a collection or the overall mission of what's going on. But the organizational structure is such that there's not really a career ladder because you're there to do that thing. And in many places, if someone says, well, we really would like you to stick around, we'd like to try to find a way to change your compensation package or to classify you in some other way in order to make this happen. But structurally, that usually means you need to become somebody else's boss. You got to become a supervisor or a manager or a coordinator or whatever. And none of those things have anything to do with doing the specialty that you're there to do.
Yes. Okay.
So the question is, what do you do for folks that don't want to promote, quotation marks, promote out of their job, but still need to find a way to make sure the job they have is sustainable?
I'm so glad you explained that. That is a huge issue that we have. So for example, somebody might be amazing at customer service and not want to be a manager, and they could end up at your front desk forever and do a great job and still be being paid $15 an hour after 15 years there, right? An educator who is amazing at giving tours or teaching classes has nowhere to go if they don't want to be an administrator. And I hadn't really thought about that in terms of something like conservation or exhibit design, but there are museums where that will never be a leadership role. I don't think the issue is restructuring. You don't want to have sort of a promotional, you don't want to promote those people out of their expertise. You want to keep them in their expertise. So it's not creating different positions in a way, it is creating different levels within a position. I would love to see master teachers, master play facilitators at the Children's Museum, master visitor engagers. The names could be anything, but people who you recognize their value, they become part of setting the standard for how you do things, and they are recognized, they are compensated and recognized accordingly. And you don't need to, in order to make a living wage or in order to get a promotion, what feels like a promotion or that value, they don't need to be promoted into a job that they are not suited for. The other thing to think about related to that is that if people are at a certain level in the organization, it is well worth the organization's efforts to be giving them professional development that treats what might be their future career or their future skill set. And this is especially true for frontline employees. I talked yesterday to Leif Carlson at the Nordic Museum, I think it's called, in Seattle, and he has staff spend 20% of their time doing things that are outside what their normal job description is, and working with other departments. And so again, people at the front desk might learn that they are amazing exhibition designers, or they may learn that they are amazing educators, and they learn this and they contribute to this, and they contribute their great knowledge of the customer to this because he has that flexibility for them to interact and learn. And eventually you might be growing people out of your organization, and if you are, good for you, because they are going to remember your organization fondly, and it will have been a stepping stone in a wonderful career.
So it's a little bit of each, it sounds like. You're giving the example of, it's nice to have opportunities in an effort to broaden or challenge your teams.
Mm-hmm.
But also when you're really good at something, I know that actually one of the questions that came up in registration was all about tiered positions for floor level teams. And that was something too that I was thinking about while you were answering that question, because at my past museum, we had that too. And I've seen that at multiple museums, that you do get really, really good at one position. Well, do you have tiers within that? Because there's not a management ladder that you're going up, maybe, but maybe even tiers within the position that you have. I know that when I was at my last position, I became a senior director instead of going to an executive director. So it was that I was getting that promotion or title change, compensation wise, all of those types of things. But it wasn't necessarily that I was going to the next step on the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. There are a few other questions. Does anybody want to come off of mute and ask a question while I'm reading?
I also just want to take a minute, and I know that Beth put in a link for seed management, and thank you for that. And I'm just putting in a link for Culture Shift, which is a program that I'm in the middle of now, and I will launch again in 2025. And right now, if you are interested or know someone who's interested, there's a wait list that you can join.
Awesome. One of the questions that was asked was, aside from leading by example, once we've ensured that our department that we lead personally are non-toxic, do you have any tips for encouraging that positivity to seek into the larger organization?
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
So
or whoever
essentially, I'm a leader of a department. My department is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get that status throughout the entire museum,
Right.
even though we're not the top person?
How can you influence sideways in that way?
Right? Sideways or up, for that matter too.
I think that is where it gets really difficult, right? So if you are doing a great job and your leader doesn't care about the way in which you are doing a great job, it's going to be a fight, right? And you're going to have to decide how much you want to fight for that. One of the really critical things, I think, is to understand what they value, right? So if you value caring and you value exploration and experimentation and risk-taking, for example, and they value results, right? There are ways that you can link strong management with better results. And so to be a little bit canny about the argument that you're making and maybe do a little bit of research. Again, most research about this type of thing has to be from corporate documents because there's not a lot of research in the nonprofit world. So that's the best thought I have, I guess, other than if you have an opportunity for collaborative work, like an interpretive plan is happening or strategic planning is happening, those are great opportunities to bring those to the table with a facilitator who might outside consultants have a different kind of power than internal people, and might be able to raise that to a dialogue museum.
One of the things I was going to mention too is that I know one of the techniques that we used too was having interdepartmental meetings, in that we had our team that was doing well, and we were very pre-planned on things, and we were just that planning type of folk. And we knew other departments weren't. And that was frustrating because it was holding us back in certain ways. So we set up kind of a rotation for the month, and that when we had our departmental meetings, we would invite another department to come as a representative to do a report out of what they were doing, to make sure that we were up to date and we could meld together and kind of plan some of our things on the same track as they were. If we knew that a marketing initiative was coming out for certain things, then we could do that. For the most part, we weren't getting like an official update in regards to that. But when we invited them to our meeting and we said, oh yeah, this is what we're planning for 2 months down the road, 5 months down the road, kind of thing, then they would say, oh yeah, so are we. Here's what we have. One of the other things that we did too was I would always take notes on all of my department meetings, and those notes from the meetings would be circulated to all directors or leaders. So then I had the opportunity as a director to read the notes from the marketing team meeting and then integrate some of that information into letting my team know. Or I got updates from the development team and I could integrate that into some of the things that I had. So I think that like cross communication really helped us, even though some of the other teams may not have had the same skill set as we did. We kind of were, asking repeatedly, like instead of going and saying like Nagy, be like, hey, we're going to start sharing our minutes. Is this something that everybody can do just to keep us in morning huddles and all that stuff?
You're looking for the side door as you're describing, and maybe finding like one, it's like community organizing. Maybe there's one other department that wants to trade ideas and practice and grow together. And then maybe there's one more. And then maybe there's one more.
Right. Exactly. Another thing that has come up, which, how nice. Michelle, we love it that you join us all the time. Can you come on and ask your question? Because I know that you're good at it. Michelle is from the Minnesota Children's Museum, and she is an exhibits guru.
That seems a little, thank you.
Yes, say thank you.
My question was just at the beginning, and Beth, I don't know if it was you or Rebecca, you had mentioned, we're going to be talking about who plans the meeting, who gets to talk. And I just wanted you, if you could elaborate more on that, like what are some other meeting structures that you've seen work before? And I'm at my queue with a bunch of people, so I'm going to go back off, but thank you.
I love that. Okay, so often all staff meetings, for example, in a museum, are people are being talked at, right? And especially museums that are larger. And so let's say you have a museum of 60 people, and you have the museum director shares an update and has invited 3 department heads to share an update. I understand why people do that, but there is a way in terms of values and culture that you are reinforcing this idea that there are certain people who are leaders of the work and that their voices matter and that the others are there to listen. Another way to do that would be to share that same information in a memo or in a video that people can watch whenever they want to, and spend your meeting time brainstorming something. So we are thinking about having this exhibit in 2028, or, people have been thinking about a lot of this around the 250th coming up in history museums. How could we as a museum tackle this subject? And maybe you break out into small groups, right? Think about different ways to do it. Maybe you have a skilled facilitator who can facilitate a 60-person brainstorm. There are other ways to hear people's voices. I was just in a meeting this morning with a strategic planning client where they did end the meeting with everybody sharing any shout outs that they wanted. And everybody shared, they're like, I just want to recognize this person for this, and this person for this, and this person for this. Ending with the director, who mostly recognized people who were not leadership level for in a meaningful way for things that they had done that moved the organization forward and showed that he really saw them. So those are two things, like two ideas that might be separate from a standard meeting that I've seen in a museum. Likewise, department meetings are usually you go around and share out. All of that could be a memo, you know, and you could use that time for collaborative work. Also, sorry, somebody else was just telling me that they just canceled all standing meetings in their museums because they tend to be a waste of time, and you can share that information by memo. So why have those?
Interesting.
A few thoughts.
That's good. Good. One of the questions as a follow-up to that in the chat was, when do you even have an all-staff meeting?
I mean, when do museums have it, or when should one have it?
Just in general. My suggestion is keep it consistent.
No.
Pre-plan it, and in the beginning, not a lot of people are going to be able to make it, but if you plan it on the same time every single month for months on end, eventually they're not going to schedule stuff over it.
I think people are going to stop scheduling stuff over the meetings if they feel worth going to.
That's even better. Even better, yeah.
The standing meetings might be, you know, you end up in this sort of fix where you're thinking, oh, I have this meeting coming up. What are we going to do? Right. And then why?
Hello, this is Jamie.
Hi, Jamie.
Terre Haute Children's Museum. That was my question. Just to clarify, I think our struggle is more that most of our operations team are high school and college kids that primarily work on the weekend. And of course, our managers and our leadership team work during the week. And so getting those groups of people together feels near impossible. And I don't know how to accomplish it.
Yeah. Marie, are you still on? Is Marie Bean still on?
I think I'm here. Yes. Hi.
You want to talk about how you do that?
I was about to +1 that in the chat, and I wasn't fast enough. Yeah. So we have our all staff. We have the same scenario, Jamie, and we hold our all staff meetings in the evenings on Zoom. And obviously, we pay the folks that are hourly to attend. We do not pay the people that are salaried to attend. It's at the same time. They have been every 6 weeks. We're actually moving to every month in the new year. And we're trying some things like breakout rooms, which we're not actually very awesome at yet, but we're trying to sort of make them more engaging over time. But picking the time and sticking with it and having it be in the evening. And I would say we get, you know, probably 40% participation across our whole staff, which is 70 to 80 people, depending on the time of year. So haven't figured it out yet, but that's what we're.
It's one solution, right? Evenings.
And I like that option of being virtual. You know, I mean, I know that came up in some of the other things on the chat. We're right at time, so we're going to wrap really soon. But even in some of the things that we had either in questions or in the chat of like, give people that flexibility. They don't have to be there in person, but they can get the information via Zoom. And that's okay. So many people are familiar with that at this point in time. So I think that's a great option too, Marie. That's good, innovative, awesome. Well, we have reached the 3 o'clock mark, and I know that there are more questions. I know that we didn't get to everything that was on our list here either. Maybe we're popping this on Rebecca, but we did talk a little bit about back by popular demand because we had such a huge registration. But also, Rainey and I are thinking about doing some little museum minis that are pre-recorded, and they just go out on a weekly basis for those questions that didn't get answered during the call, but we want to still get to them. So maybe we'll have Rebecca on to do a couple of those museum minis, just so that we can get more of these questions answered and out to more folks. So thank you so much for coming. We had such a great group today. So many lovely and wonderful questions. And we also have a really strong understanding that people care about this stuff. So that's really going to help us in planning for 2025 and making sure that we talk a lot more about this because we know it's going to be good. So thank you so much for coming. We love it that you're here, and we will send you the registration for January tomorrow. Thank you so much.
You all. The visual waterfall of Zoom as people hop off is fascinating.
Isn't it interesting? Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. And then also you kind of wonder, like, are some of these people just having it running in the background and they have walked away?
Right.
You know?
I'm 100% sure that happened in my classes during the pandemic.
Right? Oh yeah, right. Well, and this is the nice thing too, that as the host, I can remove people if they're not
Mhm.
leaving themselves. So
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
well,
That was
good.
great.
Good. It was so good. I think that, you know what I mean, people are just itching for information and they want actionable, like what can we do? But we know that it's more than just like changing one thing for tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's a big lift to make real change. And so,
right. Exactly.
yeah. So thank you. I'm going to read the email that you drafted right now.